Welcome to the Climate Conundrum Podcast. I'm Sanika Diwanji, and today's episode is something I have been looking forward to for a while now. As someone who started off as a journalist and now transitioned into the role of a climate communicator, I have always admired the power of stories and storytelling in the way we shape and see our world. Environmentalism, environmental crisis, all of these are big words, but they need someone to help match the real experiences of people. And today we have someone who has spent 3 decades doing just that, shaping, narrating, and showing a mirror to the environmentalism aspect of India, the landscape in India. He's someone I deeply respect for his work and his approach to environmentalism. So I'm very happy to introduce Gopi Warrior, who is the managing editor of Mongabay-India. Gopi, as he's known to many, is not just a journalist but a chronicler, I believe, of India's changing landscapes. He's worked with some of the most respected publications in India and Africa, if I'm not mistaken, right from Hindu Business Line to Down to Earth, and now Mongabay. So his career spans continents, but his heart and pen, I feel, have always been rooted in telling stories that matter. So I'm very pleased to have you here, and it's an honor.
Thank you, Sanika. It's such a pleasure to be part of Climate Conundrum, and I really look forward to today's conversation.
Great. So without wasting any time, I think I'm just going to dive straight in. There are many layers to the conversation I'd like to have today. But let me start by maybe asking you a very obvious question that when you look back on your journey, you have been reporting on climate issues, or so to say, the environmental biodiversity aspect of journalism before it became cool. Now I think it's become more mainstream. Everybody's talking about climate, but you were doing this when this was sort of relegated to the back end of the editorial desk. So, what has been your experiences? And I think I'm curious to know, was there a pivotal moment when sort of it solidified your passion that, no, this is what I want to do?
The pivotal moment for me, Sanika, actually perhaps came when I was in college, even before I sort of went into journalism. So I haven't done much of science, formal science education. I have a bachelor's in zoology, and after that, I went into uh, uh, literature and journalism,
Mm.
and much of all that I've learned is on the job, kind of. But when I was doing my bachelor's in zoology, uh, we had a paper on environment and ecology. Which I presume, as it was taught 40 years ago, was is much different from as it is taught now, because disciplines have grown. So. But it was taken, it used to be taught by a very interesting professor, and I did have a passion for writing, because I had started writing even when I was in school. I used to write for school magazine, etc. So I had a passion for writing, and this love for environment. So somewhere at that particular point of time, I sort of, if you can, if you sort of force me to think back and put me onto a pivotal point, I think that's the time when I thought that I would want to become an environment journalist. And that was very early days of environment journalism. Of course, I was very interested reading uh, people like Daryl, people who are pioneers, people who are one generation senior to me in environment journalism, people like Daryl De Monte, who later became my environment journalism guru, Claude Alvarez, Bitu Saigal, Usha Rai, who did some fabulous work, and now she's writing for Mongabay-India. So we are very privileged to have somebody like Usha writing for us. And Daryl used to write before he passed away. So people like that, and I used to read their work and sort of used to get fascinated by it. But once inside journalism, I think there were quite a few pivotal points which uh, guided what I did, and made me feel good that I sort of stuck on with what I wanted to do because, in the 1990s, when the economic reforms just sort of kicked in,
Mhm.
and the entire country was going gung ho about reforms, and those days I was like uh, like an environment journalist for a business newspaper. Now you can't. I mean, it can't be. In a business newspaper, and everybody is writing about business. I'm sitting there talking about environment. And like relegated to the backbench kind of a thing in the newsroom. But there was a time when I really sort of thought, okay, I mean, what I did was right. This was when if you remember, 1998, we had an atomic blast in Pokhran. Hmm?
Yeah.
And then India was under sanctions, economic sanctions, and one of the first leaders to come to, I mean, foreign leaders to come to India was Bill Clinton. He came to India in 2000. So uh, everybody, I mean, the media was agog with, I mean, everybody, I mean, there were pundits, political pundits, diplomacy pundits, etc. And the media, and they were agog with, what could be Clinton's, you know, big movement when he comes to India after that break. So. Um and I was following it up. I mean, those days not so much of internet, but through other readings and little bit of internet that was there, and I had this feeling that something big is going to be to do with environment, because the
Yeah.
reason was very simple, because 1997 there was this Kyoto Protocol of the climate change convention, and everybody was looking at India as a big place for emissions trading. So I had this feeling, I had this gut instinct that it could be to do with environment, and I approached my e- editor and said, "Can I do a op-ed on this?" So I mean, they for the editor it was a low risk decision, but to give him credit, he said yes, do it. But it
Yeah.
was low risk decision, because if it wasn't true, I mean, it's just one of those things which misfired. But if it is true, it's like a big gain. So and that's what happened. I mean, if you remember, the big deal was Clinton went to Taj Mahal, and in front of Taj Mahal, he said we have to do environment action, and he literally opened up a gift hamper after economic sanctions, saying that we should do this, we should do that, etc. US will help you with this. So that was, I mean, so what happened then? I mean, which is like, for somebody who's, I think I was in my 30s those days, and then the next day the editor says, "Oh, Gopi, you did well. Why don't you write the editorial for tomorrow?" And so that's like a major breakthrough for an
Yeah.
ordinary reporter, somewhere in the back of beyond. So that was a big kind of a moment for me. Yeah, but I also sort of, Sanika, want to sort of say it. I was fortunate. I mean, though I was working in fairly, I wouldn't say the word hostile, but not so friendly environment, writing on environment, those in those years.
Mm.
But at least in my initial jobs, uh, I was helped by some people. I mean, who mentored me, who guided me, and sort of gave me that confidence that I mean, what you're doing is not bad after all. So I want to remember some of those people today in front of you.
I love this journey, and I think it makes sense, right? As someone working in the field as well, and coming from a place where there is no mentorship directly available, I see that you're doing the same and passing the legacy on to many new upcoming journalists, budding people who want to work in the field. So I can see the circle is coming full, and you're here now imparting your own experiences and knowledge. So when you started off, you've covered a lot of environmental movements before that term sort of existed. And I think I want to talk a little bit because you're a podcaster yourself. And for listeners who haven't had a chance to do that, I would urge you all to definitely take a listen to Mongabay's podcast with Gopi, speaking about his foray into environmental reporting, about the landscape in India and how it changed over years. And there are particular places where he's talked about the Chipko movement, the Narmada Bachao Andolan, which were sort of pivotal and defining in India's environmental discourse. They were grassroots driven, women led often as well, and deeply local movements that managed to capture the national attention, which hadn't been seen before, or even if it had, it hadn't really moved people to action to that degree. So, from your vantage point as a journalist, do you think media narratives helped shape public opinion and even policy at that point? Were there any stories that you reported or followed closely that made you think, this is the power of journalism?
Yes, those. That. I was fortunate to do some amount of reporting before that tipping point. I think the tipping point was in the late 1990s, beyond which uh, media, uh, public, and national consciousness was less interested in environmental movements and but that was not so in the 1980s and 1990s, and certainly not so in 1970s. But I cannot talk about it because I was not a professional those days. I came into this field only in the late 1980s, uh, last part of 1980s. So, but I mean, and this is not something that um, I am saying. People who are far more uh, aware on environmental history, people like Ramchandra Guha, Dr. Ramchandra Guha, have documented this. I mean, the Chipko movement is considered to be the starting point of what we today uh, talk about modern Indian environmentalism, and that was in 1973. And and then the next big event. I mean, where I was a school student at that time, and my first time I saw my name in print was when I wrote a piece about the Silent Valley movement in the school magazine. That was the Silent Valley. That was a tipping point. That was another major tipping point. The Silent Valley, the protest against Silent Valley Dam in Kerala. So that was a major tipping point for and people, some of the seniors, the pioneers in environment movement who had just cut their teeth with the Chipko, writing about Chipko, analyzing Chipko, talking about Chipko. They had come of age by the Silent Valley. Silent Valley was late 1970s, early 1980s. So that's they were the people who took the lead, and like Darrell de Monte's very famous book, Temples or Tombs, which was published by Center for Science and Environment. It talks of three environmental controversies, and one of them is Silent Valley. So he has gone into the Silent Valley issue in quite a lot of depth. That's the time when people got involved with Silent Valley. Then through the 1980s and also 1990s, the two fairly strong movements that had caught people's attention was the Narmada and the Tehri movement, the anti Narmada movement and the anti Tehri movement. The anti Narmada movement was led by young people who were professionals who could have actually who had I mean who had degrees which could have earned them a good job in a corporate career. Medha has a research degree in from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Rahul Ram, who later went on to become, a singer, he was involved with the movement at some level. Rahul has a PhD in environmental toxicology. Likewise, Shripad Dharmadkari. I mean, all of them were people who could have otherwise gone into careers. I mean, the fact that they opted out of their careers and wanted came into the heart of India. I mean, totally unknown part of India. Till then, the Narmada Valley was known only to anthropologists and people who went to work with tribals, but and brought those issues into the mainstream, brought those issues into national consciousness. that was not something which they could have done by themselves. I mean, howsoever well-meaning and howsoever good intention they were, powerful they were, they couldn't have done it themselves. So that's where the media those days played a very, very strong role, and took this to national consciousness. And if it's not just as if media could have done it alone, I mean, the environmental activists and media could have done it. The public were receptive to it, and there were discussions in parliament which had, I mean, there were discussions in newspapers which got picked up in public discussions, and then there were discussions in parliament, etc. So it went all the way. And similarly, I mean, another charismatic person was Sundarlal Bahuguna, who came from the Chipko movement. I mean, his wife Vimla Bahuguna was also a leader in the Chipko movement, and he sort of took the cause of the Tehri Dam, and there was people were following it. The media was following it. That the turning point came slowly started coming after 1991, where as I've documented, and thank you for that promo on my podcast. Thank you. I mean, that's very nice of you. But as I've documented in my podcast, the tipping point came with starting with the economic reforms, where the focus changed into on the middle class, and middle class, it sort of turned people inwards to themselves, and that sort of reduced their focus on larger, broader, outside issues, and over a period of time, media reporting, public perception, public acceptability of reporting on Narmada, Tehri, all that stopped, and by the end of 1990s, it was all over and gone. So today, just to give you an example, when Medha sat on fast, multiple fasts, she sat on multiple fasts, or Sundalalji sat on multiple fasts, the media covered it, national media covered it, and they say, oh, it's the 50th day of fast, the country has to do something. And just compare that to the fast of Sonam Wangchuk recently, and look away, okay, there was coverage, but then if it was not big national news, or the farmers movement, or even before the the, the farmers movement from Punjab, Haryana, I mean, even less known is the farmers from the Kaveri Delta were sitting in Delhi for weeks together, and these were not so well covered. So I think somewhere the public understanding has moved away from it. I'm personally fortunate to have been on the other side for at least some part of my working career, and having been able to report. Media did play a very big role those days.
That is very interesting, and you actually tackled part of my next question as well, because I was wondering that over years, I'm sure that you've seen the trajectory of certain topics, certain issues getting more traction, getting more response from the readers versus today, right? And today we have so many more environmental issues actually that get mainstream coverage. But now that heard you, I think what I summarize is probably grassroots movements are not getting enough traction anymore as much as what they used to, when farmers sit for protest today, versus back in the days. So, are there certain critical topics, according to you, who are probably not covered as well or still struggle to find a place, versus certain topics that become the star children, so to say?
Yes, very much so. I mean, some topics get a lot of coverage today, and it's ironical that when environment coverage has actually bloomed, you know, uh, issues like Tehri Narmada and do not get coverage, but there are other areas which get coverage, and that's to do with the general demographic change, or economic change, which sort of reflected in the demography uh, that has happened post 1991 economic reform. So partially focus has really moved to urban middle class interests, because urban middle classes have have got, and that's been a direct response of economic reforms. Urban middle classes have got a far bigger economic voice. I mean,
Mm.
we can do, I mean, I can do a whole lot of things which my father couldn't have done, because my father couldn't have afforded some of those things, air travel, for instance. I mean, I travel when I feel like, but my father, he had to plan, or even going to a neighborhood restaurant. I mean, for my parents, that was a planned exercise. I mean, I can do it when I want to do it. So,
Right.
so I mean, a lot of things have changed because and that has given me. I mean, I'm putting myself as an urban middle classer in India, given me a greater economic voice, and this economic voice also in turn has given me a greater political voice. So what it has done to the environment coverage and public understanding, public interest in environment, is that what is of interest to the receiving public, that is the readers, viewers, etc., gets a lot more coverage than what is not of interest to them. So issues of garbage, urban garbage disposal gets lot of coverage. I mean, I'm not saying it shouldn't get coverage, but it does get more than
Mm.
proportionate coverage. For instance, when the dump in Kochi burned, I mean, newspapers ran that story for days to weeks together in Kerala.
Right.
A dump was burning. So those issues get, anything to do with middle class consumption gets public coverage. Anything that is away from the middle class consumption uh, do not do not get the coverage. So, for instance, there's a dam called Polavaram on the Godavari, which is
Mhm.
not yet commissioned, but a big dam project. That dam is almost as big as Sardar Sarovar Dam on the Narmada, and in terms of impact too. But Polavaram hardly gets coverage today. I mean, nobody talks about Polavaram. So, so some of those issues have gone to the back burner, but other issues have come to the forefront. Um, Energy transition gets a lot of coverage.
Right. I also feel like carbon
Yeah,
markets or
yeah,
climate finance is a star child lately, and
yes, it
I
gets
guess rightly so as well. We are moving towards it, but then biodiversity issues or particular localized climate action probably misses the beat.
misses the beat. Yeah, and you miss out a whole lot of these smaller stories which have scope for impact, global impact. You miss those stories out, and the linkage between biodiversity and climate change
Mm.
gets missed out, because conserving biodiversity is as much important to deal with climate change as dealing other actions. Renewable energy is just one part of the mitigation process. So
Absolutely.
a whole lot of it gets, but renewable energy also gets a disproportionate attention, because energy transition is also a process which has a strong governmental buy-in. So,
Mhm.
I mean, those targets are set by the prime. I mean, were announced by the prime minister. So that the messaging is, you can't get a more stronger messaging than that. To start with, and that means it has a buy-in of the entire governmental machinery. What does get missed out are the last mile issues. You have the big issues that you're going for a 500 gigawatt target, want to work towards that. But how do those targets work out on the ground? That's the last mile connectivity.
Correct.
I mean, and how do these national targets sort of relay themselves to the common man? That's one side of the last mile connectivity. And on the reverse, what are the common man's concerns towards this process? That last mile gets missed out. But
Mhm.
but those issues get covered in the media. So you open a business newspaper, like you open Economic Times. There's very strong coverage on who is investing into a solar plant, who is buying out of a project, who is buying into a project, what capacity is being built, what capacity we have achieved. So and what is the price at which a power purchase agreement was opened by, let's say Rajasthan or Gujarat or Tamil Nadu. So there's a lot of attention there. And so we have gone into a lot of details in some areas, details that did not exist, let's say 10 years ago,
Mhm.
but missing out in many other areas which have really gone to the background.
Absolutely. At Mongabay, you and your team actually do bring out stories that probably mainstream media doesn't have the capacity to reflect upon, be it biodiversity loss, community resilience, I guess, development projects, its impacts, even energy transition. And you do a wonderful job at covering it. But according to you, as an editor, are there certain key areas in the climate crisis or environmentalism that you particularly pay attention to and probably tell your team to focus on as priority?
One area which I find of very critical importance, and perhaps I think there isn't enough being reported on or even talked about, is the area of environmental economics.
Mm,
So the relationship between environment, the linkages between environment, economics, and politics. I think that is where we would need to focus more to make climate change discussion or any discussion, any environmental discussion, far more utilitarian and of use to people who read and and perhaps take action. So what happens in environmental economics? Uh, the discussion on what is the value of conserving something,
mm,
that gets missed out, and that is very important in environmental discussions. For instance, let's go back to the Silent Valley issue. Silent Valley, Indira Gandhi said, let's not have. She was the prime minister then. She said that let's not have the Silent Valley project. We gain more by conserving that rainforest than getting 120 megawatts of power.
mhm,
I mean, she had strong opposition from the Kerala government, at that particular point of time. So and we think that this was an easy decision for Indira Gandhi to take. It wasn't. I mean, she actually uh, get a committee called MGK Menon Committee to look at it and do a cost benefit analysis and then come to this conclusion. But all said and done, at the heart, somebody like Indira Gandhi had a heart for the environment. You know, uh, which is not something that we can expect of all policymakers, political leaders. Okay, so when that is there, how do you convince a policymaker? I mean, so let us imagine you have a instead of Indira Gandhi, there's somebody else who doesn't have a heart for the environment. How would you convince him or her that conserving the rainforest will give more economic value in the long run than getting a dam, which will give economic returns 1, 2, 3, 4 over the next 10 years. Then it will reduce from 10th year to 20th year, etc. And then perhaps beyond 30, 40 years, there's no returns. Okay. But this value, economic value is like in perpetuity. Where of economic value of conservation is in perpetuity. Now, for that to happen, the science of environmental economics has to be very, very good, and scientists should be in a position to argue the case, saying that yes, I mean, you keep this forest, it will grow in the economic returns will come in perpetuity. And scientists knowing that, talking about it in their papers and published papers in journals is not enough. I mean, and that is where the media can sort of take this thing. So, and for media to be able to understand this and take this, media journalists' ability to understand environmental economics has to be uh, more than what it is today. So we at Mongabay-India, we did make an attempt to through for that. We had a collaboration with the Indian National Society for Ecological Economists, and we ran a series of media workshops where some of the top environmental economists in the country And also abroad, we had an interview with Sir Partha Dasgupta. I mean, you can't get more top than that, internationally. So people who talk to journalists, talk to us about why environmental economics is important. So that's so essentially, for any environment, uh, uh, for a journalist to communicate to people, or for people to communicate back to policymakers, I mean, what is needed to know is what will be the economic benefit if something happens, and what will be the economic loss if something doesn't happen, or vice versa. So
Absolutely. And I
yeah,
think that is usually the bottom line that convinces a majority of the people.
people, yes.
That does become a key area for, say, the middle class, as you referred to.
Not even the middle class. I mean, middle class is something we are aware of, but even for rural
Absolutely.
populations, tribal communities. I mean, tribal communities can very their voices are not usually picked up and replayed, but they can. I mean, if you go to the field, you would hear them articulating it, why they want something to happen and why they don't want something to happen. So, and I think the same logic is important from a political point of view. So I think that's an area where we journalists will need to work far more. So to work on that point. I mean, what will you gain? I mean, from a politician's point of view, for policymakers' point of view, what will you gain if you do this in terms of votes, etc.? And what will you lose if you don't do it? You know, that becomes very critical. So I think firstly identifying those and articulating those and bringing them into the public discussion so that they later become part of policy process, and the voting public, deciding public can sort of use that for their informed decisions. I think that finding those linkages will be the critical part for journalists. I mean, not just to deal with climate change, but to deal with any environmental issues, and that's where we should be focusing on.
Yeah, I'm making notes. I'm aiming for my next Pulitzer right away. But the jokes aside, I guess, have you seen a story that you feel consistent reporting on from this angle that you just mentioned has driven an actual policy change? I'm trying to think of basically any ideas where at Mongabay or even before that in your career, something that you consistently tried reporting on from this lens that did manage to get some results.
What we did, I mean, it's very difficult to say this X has resulted in
Of course.
Y policy change. I mean, make those linkages. But sometimes, in a small way, some of our stories have. But what we have tried to do is more consistent kind of reporting. So, a couple of things is there was one story. It was a data-led story that we did from Himachal Pradesh
Mhm.
on decisions being taken on where to. So Himachal spends a lot of government money, public money to afforest, because Himachal
Mm.
forestry is of great importance for the slopes. So, but we did a map-driven, data-led story where it was shown that some of the places where money is being spent are not the right places. Where
Aha.
so the so I mean, where afforestation should have happened, that's not where the government is focusing, and where uh, where it should have happened, or I think I'm confused, but then where it should not, where it should have happened, government is not focusing, and where it should not have happened, government is focusing. Okay,
Mm.
and we did that story, and that actually had an internal uh, forest department, Himachal Pradesh Forest Department rethink, and they said we will look into this issue slightly more carefully in our future afforestation activity. So that's one small impact. Another small impact is, I mean, I'm sure your readers will love this one because uh, after the movie Three Idiots on Sonam Wangchuk,
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. I mean, the character there was I don't even get his name. Amir Khan's character in that movie. Uh, the, that lake in Ladakh, um, Pongyang Lake,
Yeah,
that got tremendous amount of tourists. And now I believe there are these yellow Lambretta scooters kept there so people can pose on that, etc.,
it's,
etc. So, but that tourism boom had its environmental impact, which of course now goes back to Sonam Wangchuk's fast, etc. So we had one story early on in our publishing career, Mongabay India's publishing career, which talked about this, and that I believe also had some rethink within Ladakh administration on how much tourism should be allowed. So these are specific examples, but on I think our impact has been more on a broader scale, and that's what through consistent reporting what we have been trying to do. We had a series called Environmental Elections where we looked at environmental issues, which
I
were,
loved that series because there wasn't anyone else doing that at that granular level.
yeah,
And yes, it made me feel so validated that there's some other people also looking at this agenda was missing throughout the election. Very few mentions here and there, but so
yeah.
important.
Yeah, so this is something which we did fairly successfully in 2019, and also my colleague Aditi led a process where we did a series on wetland champions. Small people who, I mean, who have a day job as a security guard at an ATM, or who's a shepherd, or something like that. But without government support, without NGO support, these are people who have worked to protect their local wetlands. So we identified 25 of them across the country
Mhm.
and did a series called Wetland Champions. And that again had a tremendous policy level impact. So much so that we are told that the environment minister, in fact, invited few of them and felicitated them for their work. So for them to be invited to Delhi, to be invited to Ministry of Environment and Forest is like going to the Rashtrapati Bhavan and getting a Padma Award, and so that level of impact it had. So that's the kind of impact we have had. Very specifically, yeah, this is where we go to, and this is where we aim to go. Because if we go beyond this, then we may be moving out of journalism, we may be moving into activism and advocacy, and that's not an area where we want to move into.
Absolutely. It is a thin line because there's a tendency to either gloss over things and or make them shiny, right? You either skip issues at heart and talk about theories and big notions of solutions, tech led solutions for climate change. And then those are the moments when we gloss over the real people impacted by these changes or the impact that climate change is happening. Whereas it's a thin line to also not give too much of a hope or too much of a depressing reality that people feel like they go into an inaction mode. So, how do you manage that? Is there a rule of thumb that you stick by?
Yeah, it's almost a day-to-day situation for us, because every time we discuss a story idea, we have this. I mean, how do you so then, I mean, you talked about the macro versus micro. I mean, I mean, something gets too micro, then its relevance is just there, and it sort of dies, the story dies. But then how do you take that to a macro level? I mean, so one example of these small people going to Ministry of Environment and Forest is like, taking small action at a very local level in locations which the minister perhaps may not have even known exist, and from there going to the that is like taking from micro to macro, and that's something we sort of try to aim almost every time we do. We hit and miss. Sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't get it. The vice versa is also true. I mean, it's not just to talk about discussions at Baku, COP at Baku, Conference of Parties at Baku, or National Climate Change Action Plan, State Climate Change Action Plan, etc., without finding a relevance of that to the local level, to the ground. I mean, So that is also true. So doing stories which sort of link both, I mean, like if it's a local story saying that, oh, it has international implications like this, national international implications like this, and vice versa, when you do an international story trying to see what its national implications are. But the other thin line is also, as you mentioned, the thin line uh, between uh, uh, negative journalism, always crying that nothing is ever right, which sort of over a period. I mean, if you do it consistently, it breeds cynicism, and on the reverse, uh, you know. Disproportionate focus on beating up, oh, this is a success, this is that, uh, and the reality is not there. I mean, reality is there. Most of these stories would have a what do you say, a plus side and also a minus side, and people living there usually would say, okay, I mean, I'm willing to compromise XYZ because it gives me ABC, so two very, very specific examples that I can tell you from Mongabay, India is, one is a very recent story. My colleague Aarti Menon and Soumitra Shinde, they traveled to central India, Tadoba, that belt. And they were they're talking with they did a story from the point of view of villagers. I mean, like, we all go to Tadoba to see. For us, it's a dream to go and see a tiger, in the wild. We all go to Tadoba to see that. But what about the people living there? So there she comes back with a very story, which is very touchingly told, uh, of how this has improved their incomes, their economic status
Aruba
improves.
has been cited as a good case study. In fact, a lot of national parks in India, tiger conservation has had many good implications on the local villagers as well, who may have been displaced but
Yes.
have found an alternate livelihood.
They have found an alternative livelihood. They've got more income. But what they've also, the numbers, and it's a success story, conservation success story. Tadoba tiger numbers are doing very good. But the flip side of it is tigers are moving out of the forest. They're moving into villages. They're having far more, encounters with tigers, which leaves them injured, dead. But they so how do you Aarti has sort of succeeded in telling the story in both black and white, and sort of telling that it's gray, and we all live in the gray area. I mean, we don't live in a black or a white zone, so truthfully telling that story. Similarly, one of my colleagues, Priyanka, did a story from one of the earliest wind farms in India, in Tamil Nadu. And she went there, and her story said people like the wind farms because that's again given them employment, given them, but it has negatively affected their agriculture. So there is that bit of dislike for it. But they have sort of found a balance and say, okay, this is okay. I mean, we can live with it. We do gain this, and that's what much of life is about. Problem is when you get into either or journalism, or you get into activism or advocacy, you are willing to see only one side and not accept the other side. So it's a very thin line that we have to do almost day in and day out. And this is from the time we think of a story idea till the time we execute the story.
Absolutely. The blacks and whites do make up the gray world, the reality that we live in. So you have worked in many challenging environments, technically and even literally, while covering stories, because India is a vast place. Most of the environmental stories end up happening in the rural hinterlands,
Yeah.
where traveling to that place and even reporting from such places is is difficult. Um, Literally, I think it's just yesterday and today. India is also mourning 40 years of the Bhopal gas tragedy, for example. So when such incidences happen that leave a long-term impact, um, does it teach you something about perseverance in this field? Because you like touching upon the grays, right? Sometimes the grays can get overwhelming, and as someone witnessing these things, it's hard to maintain positivity in face of degradation that you see around. The idea that No matter how much you're putting in, people don't seem to care. How do you help younger journalists navigate the sort of hopelessness that might come with these activities?
Yeah, I think we have to go beyond the hopelessness, and that is the only hope, you know. So, I, I mean, we should sort of train ourselves uh, to do what we can do. I mean, to the ultimate limits in terms of do very good journalism, you know, very good journalism, and hope that it has impact, and when there is an impact, you know, talk about which gives us good which sort of encourages us to do more work, you know. But and that's what I would say journalists should be doing. But at the other on the other side, we also should be aware that we are only a small cog in the larger wheel. So so I mean, do not get in. I mean, and that's a big problem because journalists literally get taken in by their own sense of self-importance, that that they literally say I versus the government, or I versus corporation X, or I versus corporation Y, you know. I mean, appreciate that you're a small part of this large system. So you can do only as much as what you can do, and what you hope to do is you know, sort of start that process of change, which you don't need to take end to end, you know. You just start that process, and somebody picks it up, and sort of hopefully it grows. Now if it doesn't grow, what can you do, you know? So that is, I mean, if you have that kind of a sense of self, I think you're less prone to being disappointed, and you know, uh, that's what I mean. That's what I think after nearly nearly 40 years, my understanding is it almost goes into a philosophical level. But I do hope the younger people get to it earlier than what I have got into. Yeah.
It is a philosophical question, and these musings, I think, come to everyone working in the sector at some point. Some start early, and some have the existential questions a little later. But I don't think it escapes anyone. These are wise words. I will make a note of them as well. I think we have spent quite a time discussing a lot about the journalistic aspects. But in terms of the environmental policy today, I know it's hard for you to comment on policy issues, but where do you think India is going right? And where do you think India needs to improve or really pick up pace and do more?
Well, I feel, and I've sort of said that in one of my podcast episodes, and I feel that's very critical, is the balance. I mean, the way we have been structured, the balance of power between the executive, legislature, judiciary, and give ourselves some uh, make journalists feel good, the media, you know, the fourth estate, yeah. And if there is, as long as we can, and we have seen it time and again in India. I mean, certainly in my nearly 4 decades of work life, I have seen it. When the balance is more evenly distributed, then it doesn't accumulate in one, you know, one of the pillars, that is either the executive or the legislature or the judiciary or us, the media, you know. And once if that is there, then the works larger system works. So I think more than worrying too much about what can be the good policies and how it can be driven, uh, it's better to worry more about the larger democratic process, and ensure that at no point of time any of these four becomes disproportionately powerful. And if this is not disproportionately, if the four are reasonably balanced out, evenly balanced out, then good policies will come. Because if the executive or the legislature, I mean, which has the primary responsibility of developing policy to be guided by the executive, if the legislature and the executive is not driving good policy or is driving policy that is bad for the environment, then either the judiciary or the media will put checks and balances into the process. And then there would be a scope for correction. We have seen that in the past, multiple times in the past, But if the power is in disproportionately in one hands, then it will not happen. I mean, if it's disproportionately in the hands of the executive, then they will say, we'll do what we please and you guys keep quiet. And the reverse, I mean, if it's too much in the hands of judiciary, they'll put spokes at everything that the executive does. And ultimately, executive has to run the country. It's not the judiciary. And if it's in the hands of the media, then media will criticize everything. And ultimately, it's the executive, judiciary, etc., legislature that has to run the country, not us. So I think finding that balance is the most important. And and I presume if we focus on trying to get that right most of the times, take corrective actions on, if our journalism can bring some correction into that when there's a disproportionate concentration, then we have done the policies will follow. Good policies will follow.
That is absolutely true. The balance needs to exist between the existing mechanisms that ought to work for everyone's benefit. Now is a slightly sensitive question, and I know how difficult it might be to answer this. So I understand if you want to skip this. But have there been any censorships in any of the stories or ideas or topics that you would have wanted to cover, but considering the fact that journalists are at the most peril in India and have been for the last couple of years. We've been topping the charts for um Journalism Freedom Index. And it's quite a shameful thing, but it is what it is today. But in terms of environmental reporting, does it also impact in the same way?
Uh, I mean, I have to answer for myself and I have to answer for truthfully for myself. I have never faced a censorship issue. I have never faced a censorship issue. Neither have I faced a threat, life threat or, something like that. I've been in this field and I have covered some uh, fairly difficult, environmental conflicts and environmental stories, and some of the stories where I was covering when I was a young reporter, there weren't other people covering it. So, I was like sticking my neck out. But I haven't faced that threat. The danger today is more from the sense of self-censorship by the media rather than censorship. I mean, I do know that some media house get pressures, but more than that is the danger is self-censorship. You say, oh, let's not do this story because this could get us into trouble. you know so that is more a danger. But I noticed that in the recent months, that pressure has sort of decreased. And that pressure has decreased partially because, again, coming back to the point of the balance between some amount of balance between the four pillars have sort of happened middle of this year, uh, and after the national elections, and some amount of balance has happened. So that has positive implications on all the other pillars of democracy. So that is a very specific case, of balance happening because of you know uh, because of censorship or self-censorship. So that's more important.
This has been such a nice conversation, but I think we've run out of time. So I will have to stop here. But I can't thank you enough for sharing so candidly your experiences, your stories, and the wisdom you've gained over years, right? You've given us much to think about. And I think the environmental chapter of the Indian landscape, so to say, is a hopeful one as you've painted, and the role of journalists will definitely be vital to to the progress in this area. For anyone who wants to start out on this journey and get into reporting from biodiversity, environment, or any related fields, are there any final parting thoughts for them?
Ah, final parts. Okay. I mean, I would say I would say something. I mean, I can only share what works for me, and something if it has worked for me over the years, that means it has stood the test of time. So I would say stay humble, stay hungry. I mean, that's very important. I mean, be prepared to be a student all through your life, and only when you will, the moment you say that I know it all, your journalistic journey is dead, because there's no space for know-alls in journalism. So the whole process of journalism is when you say I still don't know. I mean, there's so much I don't know about, and that gives you balance. And number two, which literally is a guiding philosophy for Mongabay India, is be more in search of light than heat, because there's a lot of heat in environment, and you I mean, as journalists, we can create heat, because we can add to the heat of, we can make controversies of issues which are just basically discussions. So it give us good TRPs, or give us more readership, but that's transient. I mean, if you need credibility in your work, you really need to be uh, more you should be talking more about the real issues uh, behind any of these uh, areas where there is discussion, rather than getting adding up heat onto it. So more light rather than heat should be a guiding principle for any journalist. And three, try to stay away from the temptation of becoming an activist or becoming an advocacy. I mean, I'm not in any way saying that activism or advocacy doesn't have a role in the world. I mean, a lot of changes have happened in the world because of activists. A lot of changes in the world has happened because of advocacy. But if you're at a given point, and even in a person's life, you can be an activist at some stage in life, and you can be a journalist in some stage in life. You could be an advocacy person in some stage of life. But at least be clear what you are at that particular point of time. When you are a journalist, be aware that you're a journalist, and not an activist. I mean, don't be an activist pretending to be a journalist,
Mhm.
or vice versa. Journalist pretending to be an activist, then you're not being truthful to yourself. So I think essentially being truthful to one's own conscience is perhaps the only way to do your work, and you will be respected for that. I mean, and I mean, I can state specific examples, where I have gone deep into controversies, and done reporting which are not pleasant to parties concerned, and but still, you know, when the time comes, they will respect you for your work. They may not like what you have reported. They may have wanted the stories to go a different way, but they'll respect you for your work. And I think that is very important. That's something that we should all be aiming at. And just be like a sponge. Be like a sponge, both in terms of your understanding, and there's so much of information flowing. Be aware that you should be judicious. Some information has to be sifted out. Not everything you can absorb. But more than that, be like a sponge to look at the linkages uh, out from out of your area of focus. Look at the political linkages, look at the economic linkages, look at the livelihood linkages, look at whether some of these stories that you do are very good stories, but then they are in a sense sort of widening the disparity, or making are not just to everybody. They're widening the equality issue. So be aware of those linkages. And if you're truthful to yourself, you make a very fine journalist. Because ultimately, if environmental journalism is all about the balance, then at the core of your work, you have to try and maintain your balance, so that you can sort of communicate about balance.
Thank you so much for your time, for all these amazing insights. And I hope the listeners also feel the same immense gratitude that I feel right now. Thank you for your time and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Sanika. That's very nice of you. Very nice of you to invite us, invite me, and invite Mongabay India for this conversation. And I hope your podcast does and wonders as we go along.